I'm excited for this next episode of Now to Next. I've got a unique set of guests here. Actually, a mutual friend of ours reached out. We don't know each other real well, but just getting to know each other over John Rich whiskey in the background, country music, and lots of other things. But I'm excited to have a couple guests here today. Jeffrey Wilson and Brian Andrews. How you guys doing today?
We're doing great, man. Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
It's my pleasure, man. Super cool. Being a guy who did not serve, but I've done a lot of work in the veterans community. As I mentioned before we started, I literally just got back yesterday. I'm filming a documentary with Creative Vets right now. I did the documentary on Canines for Warriors. I did the documentary on Folds of Honor, and I'm a super big fan of anybody helping veterans and post-traumatic stress. So awesome to have two Navy veterans on here today that have taken and channeled their work into something new, which is writing thrillers. So I'm fascinated in sort of how this came about. I guess, Brian, let me start with you. You were a nuclear engineer, right? Is that correct? So tell me a bit about your Navy career, and let's go from there.
Submarine officer in the Navy. So all submarine officers have to qualify nuclear engineer. Something to do with the fact that I guess they want people who know something about nuclear power when you're running a nuclear reactor. Call me crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a really, really fun, great experience. You know, you're 20 years old and they put you in charge of this, $2 billion submarine with nuclear reactor and torpedoes and missiles. And you're out there doing these denied missions, sneaking around. You really are just sort of out there, just the crew. The submarine operates independently. And that's sort of amazing, just the autonomy as a young man that you have, operating on this machine.
Is how stir crazy do you go in a submarine, and how long are you typically in that thing without leaving it?
Yeah, so the typical deployments are 6 months, and they're broken up into mission packages. So, I mean, you could be out there. My longest was we were doing some really cool stuff, and we got extended on station. So my record is 102 days at sea continuously, and the only thing that really limits the amount of time that you can be out there is the amount of food that the submarine can carry. So by the end, you're down to, no joke, Navy beans and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, but the cooks, they do a great job. They're true wizards because the morale of the boat is really determined by how well they're cooking food for you. That's the one thing you have to look forward to. So
that's
they can turn brown lettuce into anything. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, I think then they're going to mix that in with something else, so you don't even know what you're getting at that
point. That's called kale salad. No, my fraternity cook had a similar skill set. We never knew what we were eating, but morale was always pretty solid. Jeff, and you're totally different. Trauma vascular surgeon, working with a SEAL team. So, I mean, tell us, is that like a field medic, or is this like a MD? Like, what's your background in medicine?
Yeah, so it's very, we don't have time to get through the whole thing because it's all very strange. But I had served in the past. I was in the Navy, and then I worked with, was in a motorcycle accident. I was in Navy aviation and got in a motorcycle accident before I finished my training, and left the Navy and went and worked with another government agency for a few years. And that was a violent experience during peacetime, and I decided to pursue a life of peace in another field. So I went to medical school, became a physician, joined the Naval Reserves because I still had that need to. You work with veterans all the time. It's like in your DNA, this need to serve. So I was a reservist, and I was going to be an academic doctor, and then they crashed those planes into the towers, and it pissed me off like it did everyone. So I went back on active duty and did a deployment with the Marines as a combat surgeon. And while I was downrange, I ran into some folks from my spooky past, and they said, "You know what you should be doing?" So I wound up working with the JSOC SEAL team and did a few years of that. And my role was to, these are very small packages that we were delivering, very, maybe 4 guys, 6 guys in denied areas. And so the challenge was, how can we provide surgical support? Well, we can't do it from afar, so let's train you. So I went through green team training and qualified to go deploy with them. And so it would be me and another guy, an 18 Delta combat medic, and we would go and support whatever the mission was. And with the caveat that we were supposed to be able to keep a guy alive for 24 to 48 hours in a denied area. So did that for a while and then moved on to other things. So.
Wow, I love it. Man, so all right, so I guess I'll start with you then, because you guys started writing separately, right? And you sort of found each other that way. So, tell me a little bit, Jeff, about what made you turn to writing.
Yeah, so it's funny because you should ask Brian the same question because it's a completely different answer and path. For me, writing is just something I've always done. So I published my first short story when I was 14. I've just always written. When I was 8, I was writing fan fiction for like Star Trek and like, just crazy stuff like that. So it's always been this thread for me. You saw in my bio, I've done a lot of things. I've been a pilot, I've been a firefighter, and all these other things. But whatever I was doing, I was always writing, mostly for me, publishing some short stories. So the transition into writing full-length fiction, novels and stuff was just very natural, but the writing was always there. It became kind of a catharsis after spending some time in war, of course. But fiction writing is just always part of what I've done. It's as long as I can remember. So, running into this guy, I was actually writing more supernatural thrillers like horror fiction. And those books were doing pretty good. And then I ran into Brian at a conference, and he is the brainiac of the group. So he had this great idea that we write together, and now that's what I do because I don't have to do anything else.
Well, yeah, I get that. All right, all right, Brian, tell us how did you get to that conference? What were you writing?
So I think like Jeff said, our path to get to that conference was a little different. So for me, when you're underway on a submarine, you get long watches, especially if you're on station, everybody's being quiet, not a lot of noise. So, a 6-hour watch, 8-hour watch to pass the time, what do you do? A lot of times what you're doing is, especially in the engine room, if the bell's not changing, you're telling stories, this oral storytelling tradition of, hey, what happened? Let me tell you what happened to this guy. So I used to be this guy that when we go into port, I would collect stories. I'd ask guys on other boats, tell me something funny that happened. What's going on with you? And I'd collect all my stories. I'd save them up, and then underway, I would tell the stories. And when I left, I remember one of the guys was like, hey, you're a pretty good storyteller. Have you ever thought about writing a book? And I had never thought about writing a book. So, but he put that earworm, it was in my head after that. So it sort of knocked around in there for years. And then finally I said, you know what, maybe I'll give this a try. And so I wrote my first book and quickly realized that, I don't really know what I'm doing. I don't know how to get it published. I don't know this industry. So I went to this Thriller Fest conference, the conference that Jeff was referencing, because that's a collection of thriller authors, like-minded people, agents, editors. It really is the who's who of the thriller writing industry get together once a year. And it's an amazing community. And it has a lot of similarities, I would say, to the US Navy. And so I think, it was natural that Jeff and I gravitated towards each other and had this idea that, in theory, writing's supposed to be this solitary like endeavor. That's how it's always been portrayed. Author holes up in their office in their typewriter, now computer, and they type and you do it by yourself. But in the Navy, you don't do anything by yourself. You can't deploy a $6 billion submarine by yourself. It takes a team. So why can't we apply that same concept to writing, where we leverage our individual strengths and bring our different, very diverse experiences? You hear our 2 resumes are very different. So now, instead of me only being able to write submarine books, with Jeff's knowledge of medicine and special operations, we bring both of our combined skill sets and experiences together. And it makes a much more rich storytelling team.
I love that. Yeah, I actually was funny. I was speaking recently. I was interviewing my friend Remy Adeleke, who's also a Navy SEAL and an author and actor and everything. And Remy and I were talking because he just directed his first short. Obviously, he's a writer. He does a lot of stuff. But we were talking about directing, and I said, people always ask me, like, what do you do when you direct? And I honestly don't even know how to answer. And he's like, I didn't either, but I just figured it out. He had just done his first scripted short that he'd written. And he said, directing is just team building. I'm like, oh, yes, that's exactly what it is, because, it came so, like, I'm so bad at so many things that I just had to learn in my life. Like, I cannot do this by myself. Like, there's no way. So I'm just going to get, like, when I made my first short film, I just hired the best cinematographer I could afford and the best editor I could afford and I've just continued to do that. And it's like, we have all this grand success, and it's literally because I stay in my lane. I do so little. I literally do. But what I do is what I'm naturally good at. And I find that we all write off our natural talents. Like, Shaquille O'Neal doesn't think it's that cool to be 7'2", like he just, or whatever he is, like he was born that way. And so, team building for me has just been, honestly, like as an ADHD immigrant kid, it's like what I just had to do to survive, man. And so I love the fact that, what you guys were trained to do, obviously, in any major organization, in most any successful endeavor, it's completely a team job. And I would imagine, being, whether it's in a floating bomb under the water, or whether it's, downrange with 4 or 5 other dudes, in a place you're not supposed to be, you learn pretty quickly, like, man, that dude to my left and that dude to my right are pretty damn important to my livelihood. So it doesn't shock me, but I do find that I think a lot of people don't. I think if we could give an example here for people to think about, when you start doing something new, don't just like cut ties with everything you've done in your past. And like, because most people are like, okay, I retired from whatever, or I stopped doing, now I'm going to go do this. I've always found with everyone I've dealt with that there's at least a few really valuable skill sets you can bring along with you from any endeavor. So that's really great insight, the team building side of it. Obviously, you guys have a pretty, you can't tell us or you'd have to kill us. I get that, but pretty in-depth like knowledge of what really happens downrange, sort of undercover, clandestine mission type stuff. Tell us about, tell us about the first collaboration you did. I guess I'll start with you, Jeff. Tell us about the first collaboration and how different was that? I'm sure there were frustrations with writing with somebody else, but also where did you find like the blessing in it also?
Yeah. So, everything you said really resonates with me. We work a lot with veterans that are transitioning. It's a passion for us. And just to finish what you were saying, that idea of reminding veterans that you're not starting a new life with your past being erased, but there are brothers and sisters out there that still want to be in community with you and still want to support you, and you got to reach out to them. So thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah.
Our first book together was Tier 1. We just released the 7th book in that series, and we've got 3 books in the spinoff series for that one. So that's sort of our tentpole series. And I would love to tell you about all the behind the curtain conflict and stuff, but the truth of it is, and I know it sounds like something you make up on an interview, we don't have much conflict. And there was some things to learn about how to write together, because we actually have a weird system. We write simultaneously. So for us, it's really about learning to frequently communicate. But I think that the biggest lesson for us, and we established this early, and this was the key, was we brought that military mindset to this task. And that was, look, how do we function in the military? Yeah, teamwork, but what does that really mean? Teamwork means putting yourself last. It means putting your mission first and your team first, and then whatever's left over. And if
mission and me, right?
Yeah, exactly. So by putting team and mission before self, we removed all of the ego, because writing, directing, producing, there's some normal, important ego that goes into that. You have to have the confidence to be able to produce and create. But if you have ownership of that creative process, then the wheels come off the bus if you're working with someone who's an equal share partner. And so from the very start, we said, look, everything is on the table. If you change an entire paragraph and it sells one more book, I'll take that $1.74. That's fine. So we had the same business approach, but we look at the final book as something that we as equal partner team create. So not to beat it to death, this was a really, really important part of our success. We could not have done this if we didn't start out with that mindset of it's all equal. It's our book. And this, again, sounds like something you make up on an interview. But there are times now when my wife will read the book and she'll be like, oh, chapter 37, that was you. And I swear to you, I can't tell her. I don't know. I know I wrote some of it. I don't know if I wrote the first draft. I don't know if I did the rewrite. But I can't really even tell you oftentimes what I wrote first, what he wrote first. It just sort of is us doing it together.
I love it. I mean, that's honestly, that's the songwriting process too. It's, you could have a great day in the room or a crap day in the room. It's equal partnership, and you walk out of the room and then within a day, no one remembers who wrote anything. Like, it's that's like, beautiful. Oh, that's a freaking great line. Yeah. I'll assume it wasn't me if it's that good, but who knows? Right. This is an interesting conversation too, because I've had this conversation a few times with people. I have a business partner who's 30 years older than me. And when we first went into business, so I was 20 and he was 50, right? So like quite a bit of difference in life experience at that time. Now I'm 43, he's 73, still a lot of differences, but like, I've lived a lot more life now and, in the adult world. And he said something to me that it really resonates with me, that every time I share it does. So I feel like it's a good opportunity to share it for those listening. Look, I mean, business partnerships are just like marriages. I mean, they are. If you want them to be successful, you have to commit. Because if there's a ripcord, you're going to pull it every time. I mean, I love my wife dearly, but there's days, there's days where it's like, man, I can't do anything right. This, whatever. And I mean, not that where I'd pull the ripcord, honey, if you ever listen to my podcast, which you don't, but but he said to me when he said, Nick, we're just getting into business together. And I wasn't married quite yet, but I got married at 22. So I was close to getting married. And he said, I'm going to give you this advice, and it's really great marriage advice too. He goes, but here's what I'm going to tell you. There's going to be days and probably weeks, hopefully not months, but maybe even years, where you feel like I'm your business partner and you're walking uphill and I am dead weight and all you're doing is dragging me uphill. He said, as long as you understand there will be an equal amount of time I feel the same way about you, it will be just fine. And I was like, oh, I got it. Like you've got to commit to the long term. You got to commit, like, you don't commit to abuse. You don't commit to, negativity, but you commit to like, oh, there's going to be times where I'm going to feel like I'm carrying the burden and it's going to feel unfair. And it was just a really great framing of like, but if you ever were to ask me, I just didn't probably share it with you. And I was feeling the same way. So I love the fact that is how really good collaborations work. That's why we've been in business for 23 years now. And, he's getting older, having some medical issues. And I see it now more every day, but he gave me, a good 20 something years of, his prime time. That's great stuff. I guess, Brian, when you tell us, you write simultaneously, when you guys come up with an idea, I'm sure, and share as much as you want, I'm sure you would shed it. How do you start the writing process typically? Like the hardest part for most people is starting. So where do you begin?
I think we always begin with the what if question. And this is something that you'll hear a lot of writers talk about, it's that initial spark. That's the spark of Lee Child says, how do you keep somebody interested in your book? You ask them a question at the beginning of the book and you don't tell them the answer until the end, And so the what if for the author is, why am I going to invest months, hundreds of hours of my time into this project unless there has to be some driver? And it's the what if question, what if this happened? What would be the ramifications? Ramifications politically, ramifications emotionally to the characters, to society. It depends on how big your thriller is, but that's sort of the fuel that powers the engine all the way to completion. So for us to want to take on a project, there has to be some interesting spark, what if question that drives us to say, yeah, we want to really dig in and explore this and see how it affects everybody. And then we sometimes don't know. A lot of times we don't know, where it's going to go at the end. We have an idea. We say, well, what if this happened? This is probably the ultimate outcome. But then, the machination of all the parts and characters and stuff, sometimes it doesn't go to that spot. You thought it would go to that spot, but in fact, it goes somewhere else. And for us, that journey, that sort of exploration of figuring out where the what if question takes us, that's why we do this job. That's what
the journey is what makes it fun, right? My brother is a child forensic psychiatrist, and he says, Nick, there's a reason people get addicted to slot machines, not vending machines, because the outcome is different every time. And that's, I get addicted to the same thing. We talk about the songwriting process. I just actually posted a blog about this recently, but when I first went to songwrite in Nashville, I was invited by this monster hit writer who was getting on in age, a guy named Charlie Craig, but he had 300 album cuts with Johnny Cash. I mean, just an icon, and number ones and everything else. And he said, Nick, I'm inviting you to write because I think you have potential. Like, you seem to have good ideas. You're a smart kid. You're trying hard. He goes, but here's what I want you to know. The other guys in this room with you that I'm inviting you into this writing room, they all write for a living. Like, you're the only one who doesn't get paid to do this, which is fine. I just want you to know, like, we do this every day, twice a day, 5 days a week, and we've all written thousands of songs. And so what I want you to bring your best ideas. Like, that's why you're getting invited. I want you to bring everything you have. He said, but the only way you're going to get a lot out of this, and it's going to be a good experience for all of us, is if you commit to one thing. And the only thing I want you to commit to is writing the best song in the room that day. And it doesn't matter whose idea it is, but like, bring your best. But that's where the magic happens. It's because the three of us having this conversation is clearly much more magical than me sitting here lecturing to an audience on YouTube or something. And that's the beauty of it. And so what I tell people, like, not everyone's a songwriter, but for me, like, I use a process to get ready to have this conversation today so we can have the best conversation we're going to have today. Like, I'm not going to try to take you down a conversation that was a mistake I used to make. Like, oh, this is the conversation they had before, so let me look at what they've talked about before, and let's just shove down that road. I just try to get an outline of, like, what have you done? And then, like, let's talk about what's interesting and what's on your mind today, because that's when it's fun. Like Larry King, I interviewed Larry King, which still, I pinch myself. I got to tell his life story. And on camera, Larry's like, I've never talked about this on camera before. I'm like, well, why the hell are you telling me? We just met like, a couple months ago, and we're on camera for the first time together, but let's go. And people, like, whatever is on their mind, and you'll find what, obviously, when people bring energy to the room because they're excited about something, like, it just flows effortlessly. I mean, we've had those times when I've had times I probably got 3 words in a song and rewrote it in 20 minutes because the guy who came in the room with the idea was on fire for it. And my only job was like, hell yeah, keep going. Nice work. And I get credit too, which is great. And then, I have days like that too, but that's part of the trust and the collaboration. But I love that it's like, you're going to see where you're going to let the story go where it will. And that's awesome. That's probably why you have the magic in the collaboration. Jeff, you look like you want to say something.
Well, I just think that related to that, like, everything you're saying just, like, so resonates with me about, like, being in the writer's room as a songwriter. So many authors, and I've been that author who writes by myself, there is a magic of collaboration. And part of it is you help each other out, but part of it is it's just way the hell more fun. Like, it's when that what if question, that can be so much work when you're by yourself. With us, it's like 2 8-year-olds in the backyard playing Army. It's like, no, dude, what about this? Oh no, what would be even really cool? It's so much more fun, and you get this synergistic, logarithmic multiplication of effectiveness that is, part of the military ethos as well. It's a value add. So it's just so much more fun to work with. And I get to work with my best friend every day doing something that I love to do. Like, they're done. Mic drop, right? I mean, come on.
Yeah.
I feel bad for all the poor schmoes that have to do by themselves.
Yeah, exactly. All the poor schmoes who don't have a Brian, So how do you, like, one of the things that I've found is, and I'd love to hear your ideas on this. So, like, okay, so the first song I wrote, like, I thought it was great, right? I mean, I was like, man, I finished the song, and I had been, like, I'd studied song structure enough. I was 15 or 16, I don't exactly remember, but, like, I had verse, chorus, bridge, chorus. Like I did the thing the way I was supposed to do it. And I do believe you probably should learn the rules before you break them, but the rules are made to be broken, but you should learn them. But, like, I ended up finding my way to Tracy Chapman's manager. And I was like, I wrote a song for Tracy Chapman. She's like, first of all, kid, number one, how'd you reach me? I was like, well, I said, she's like, good. You have ambition. I like this. She goes, but second of all, Tracy only writes her own stuff. If you want to write music for other people, write country and pop. And so I took the advice, and that's what I started doing pretty immediately. But, once I wrote my second song, my first song sort of sucked. And once I wrote my third song, and then, now that I've written thousands of songs, like, I cringe at the first ones. And so I often tell people, like, your first one's going to suck. It doesn't matter what you do. Like, or it's never, like, if you painted a painting and you're excited about it, it's your first one. And I told you, how would you feel if you were never going to beat that painting? You'd be sort of depressed, wouldn't you? And they're like, yeah, probably would. Like, okay, so let's just flip it around. Like, you got to do one, whether it's a podcast or a blog, or it's like your first one's probably going to suck. But there's ways to make it better. You can parent it before you give it to the world. But, like, I guess I'll start with you, Brian. Like, how did you start? Like, I always want people listening to this, and my kids, I try to get them, like, I always want you to be self-aware, but not self-conscious, because it's a very different side of the same coin. How did you start figuring out, Brian, like, how do we know if this is good? How can I test this? How do I get it to a point where, it's not going to be an embarrassment to me, number one. Number two, it has a shot at commercial success. And even though like I've got a song I'm singing on right now, it's been on hold by like a major artist, and so many people just like when you send a song out to pitch it, you literally get back the words. If you're lucky, you get a response. It's pass. That's what you get. Pass. It's like, dude, I know this song is like, I know it's a hit for somebody. Like I know it, but so like, how do you get your book? Like, how did you work through that process to start figuring out, okay, this could be commercially viable, even if nobody believes in it right now, which is different, by the way, than it being commercially viable. How did you get to that point and start learning what that looks like?
Well, I'll tell you a story about the first book, which was, it's kind of funny. Jeff laughs at this because it doesn't even sound possible. I'm like, I was writing it, after I had a startup, so I was working during the day, and married, so I would just at night, really late, I'd work a couple hours, I'd work on the weekend, but it took me like 8 years to write my first book, and now we write a book in like 12 weeks. So I've made big progress. But anyway, I spent a long time on this first book, and I was we had this term in the Navy, polish the cannonball, you get nice and shiny, right? And there is a point of diminishing marginal returns. Like at some point, the cannonball cannot really get any more shiny. I mean, you could polish another 8 hours and it would not be any more shiny. But I'm polishing this cannonball, and I'm reading through it, and I'm like, oh, this character is so great. That's exactly what I would say. Oh, this person, he did exactly what I would do. That's how I would handle that situation. And then like the epiphany went off. I was like, oh no, like they're all doing and saying exactly what I would do. Every single character is just me. And I was like, oh no, this is terrible. So what I did was I went, and being, a psychology nerd, I got my Myers-Briggs out, and I gave them each a Myers-Briggs personality profile. And, that was a tool for me to say, okay, I have some structure now. And when I go in dialogue, what would this person say? I'd read their profile and be like, oh, this person's a risk taker. They don't care about, their main thing is they're adrenaline junkie, or they're focused on performance or whatever. So their responses would be in that mindset. And it allowed me to get in the mindset of different characters and create what I think was a much more interesting and varied cast. And so back to your point was, I think at some point you have to look at your work with, a critic's eye, and step back from yourself and say, not what would I do? How would I say it? How would other people receive this? What does this put forth for, would a woman who lives, a 62-year-old woman in Oklahoma City enjoy this book? Would an immigrant from Puerto Rico who's living in Miami, would they enjoy this book? How could I put elements into this story that's going to appeal to lots of different people from different, ethnicities and education levels and ages and genders and backgrounds and stuff? And so I think, songwriting probably feels the same way. Like there's a message there, and I need this message to resonate with as many people as I can. And the art of our job is finding the way to do that. And the path there is different for all different creators, but I think you have to be aware of that as you're going through the process.
I love that. Yeah. One of the things I learned when I started writing with like really good writers was reading down our lyrics without the music behind it. Cause we write the music and the lyrics at the same time, typically in a three-hour session. Typically you finish a song. And if like, when I first started writing songs, I was trying to write basically poetry. That's like, and if I were to go back and read that, like in a conversation, be like, I would, if someone gave me a beer and started talking to me this way, like I would run the other way. Like, but now when it's like, can I read it down? And it's like, okay, that sounds like I'm having a conversation with somebody. Like that to me is like the kind of songs I want to write. It's not everybody's style, but like super conversational, super easy. We're not talking about, wallowing in staircases of yarn or whatever, whatever it is, like just all this crazy figurative stuff. It's funny when you talk about the polishing of the bowling ball, I don't remember who said to me at one point, but someone said, who is another filmmaker, that said, yeah, we never finish a film. They just take it away from us eventually. And it's like, that's how I feel. It's like, we could definitely polish it some more, but like, yeah, at some point they just take it away from you, because you gotta move on and do something.
Yeah, you got to get paid at some point.
You do. And that's actually my next question. I mean, so there's a lot of people watching. Well, number one, before I forget, I think learning from all the veterans organizations I work with, but particularly right now being in the thick of making the film with Creative Vets, who uses fine art and songwriting. And by the way, they want to start doing some creative writing stuff with veterans as well. I should connect you guys. But to help people, I will. Thank you. Tell people deal with things that they don't know how to talk about, like in regular language. And like I wrote a song with a veteran last Thursday. They invited us backstage at the Opry, myself and a couple of their friends, Chris Farrar and Brian Ray. We wrote a song with this guy, Keith Brownell, and he had served 20 years doing combat missions. And I was like, man, I bet that was tough on your wife. He goes, you want to know the real story? He goes, my wife was in combat too. So I would get home, I'd high five her, and she'd walk out the door and she'd go on deployment. I'm like, holy crap. And so we just talked about this. Like, we came up with this idea for a song called When You Leave. Like a big thing to him was like, what is your intent? How do you deal with these feelings of when you leave your home, when you leave your kids, and also when you leave your friends at war? Because like that becomes your family. And so like this big idea was like, when you leave. And after we were done writing the song, he's like, oh man, I never knew how to talk about that before. It felt so silly. Like people were like, what do you mean you're like sad to leave your friends at war? And then you're sad. Like, I don't understand. But when we were able to put it in the context of like putting you in their shoes, everyone's like, oh yeah, I totally makes sense. And when we approach it from a creative aspect with no judgment in the room, it's like a really great way. And now he's got a song. We're trying to get a big artist to cut it. We'll see what happens. But that he'll be able to share with people the rest of his life. And so I love that process. And I would just encourage, veterans or quite frankly, anyone dealing with post-traumatic stress, because it happens for a lot of other reasons as well. Like, think about how you might do something that is not that is outside of your norm, whether it's paint a picture, whether it's make a ceramic, and just put what you feel into it. And I know Creative Vets has guides you can help you and other things, but it's really, I've been blown away seeing how it can help healing. And I love that they don't call it PTSD anymore. It's just post-traumatic stress, because it can be healed. So find some solutions to that. Or find some ways to connect with others who you feel, Creative Vets always pairs people with another veteran as a mentor who's been through their programs, because obviously there's nothing quite like a veteran to veteran connection. So no, it's out there, guys. I really would hate for anyone to miss the message that like you could use any of these devices to help you if you're struggling. So please reach out to any of us or Creative Vets or anybody if we can help. Jeff, you got a comment there?
Yeah, that's huge for us. That's a big part of what we do every day with our platform is reach out to veterans. And the PTSD, thank you for bringing up the PTSD. It's only a syndrome if it's abnormal, right? You have a syndrome if you don't have PTS and you've been in war. So that resonates with me. So we encourage veterans the same way you are to reach out to whatever feels like a fit. This idea of leaving, that's beautiful. I'd love to hear that song, first of all, because that is a real thing. Like when you're downrange, you can't wait to get home, and then you get home and you can never explain this to your wife, but it's like, it's not that I'm not happy being here. It's not that I don't love being here, but this need to go back over there is just an insane thing that you just can't make someone understand. But doing it through song, doing it in fiction like we try to do, one of the things we take very seriously is honoring those that have served and their families in our work. So we're writing Pulp Fiction. It's thriller, it's exciting, but we really try to honor the characters in their relationships and the impact that covert operations has on people. So yeah, anyone that's listening, reach out to whoever, including us. Our website, we get people reaching out all the time. I actually lead a men's military ministry in Tampa for a very, very large church. We just partnered with the PTS Foundation to do some work with them. That's another great organization. So thank you for sharing that message. That's enormous, and it's a huge part of what Brian and I live for every day, frankly.
I love it, man. Well, and just to further encourage that, because obviously, I've never been in that situation, but obviously there's a lot of veterans who feel that their families would be better off if they just killed themselves and got insurance money, and that's not the case, just in case you're going down that road. And I was talking to a couple of really big country stars. I'll only name drop because it's important you hear what these people think, but like Brantley Gilbert and Jelly Roll, who's blowing up right now, and these others. And they both said, I said, what would you say to a veteran? This is for the film. And I was interviewing them. I said, what would you say to a veteran who doesn't feel worthy? Like, why would a country star or a number one songwriter ever want to write a song with me? Like, they don't feel worthy to be in the room. Like, what would you say to that person to make sure they don't feel that way? And they both were like, dude, we don't deserve to be in the room with a combat veteran. Like, we feel the same way. Like, come on, man, let's go. And so I think it's just so important to realize that, like, there's certainly a level of, from what I understand from the veterans I've dealt with, of like unworthiness, and just throw that in the trash. It is not there. Everybody wants to help you. Great. If it's not that bad, even if you're still just dealing with it, reach out. Like, there's these levels of guilt. It's like Catholic guilt when it comes to veterans. And it's like, oh no, I didn't go outside the wire. Oh no, I didn't get shot at. Oh no, I didn't actually get shot. Oh, I got shot, but he died. Like, it's like, no, there's no levels here. Like, if you're struggling with something, if you're having a problem sleeping, if you're having a problem figuring out how to deal with this, like, reach out to anybody. I have never met anyone in this community who wouldn't love to help you. So that's the encouragement. Back to the money side, though, I want to make sure we cover it. So Jeff, I think there's obviously a lot of people. I get people who ask me, I have multiple nonfiction books out in the marketplace, and making a living as an author is a difficult thing. I mean, it's not the easiest way to make money typically. I always tell people, like, I probably wouldn't quit everything you're doing right now and go whole hog into that. I mean, some people, it is the best answer for them. I'm not going to say no, but like, how does one make a living doing this? And what does that even look like? Because I think there's a lot of people who'd love to know how could they make a living doing this?
I mean, I think everybody's journey is different in the writing space. There's, I think a lot of people see a book on the bookshelf and they assume that guy is now living in a 6,000 square foot house and raking in the dough. And that's absolutely not the case. I will tell you, even among the successful writers who you read and names you recognize, the percentage of them that are able to write full-time without a day job is shockingly small. Brian and I have been very blessed to be able to transition to that over the last few years. But it is not easy. So the first thing that you have to understand is if you're in love with the idea of being a writer, you're probably not going to make it, simply because the work, like you're saying, and the tenacity that's required and the never quit attitude that's required to get to where it's financially stable is enormous. If you're in love with writing, that's different. So, and that is a different thing. We mentor writers a lot, and you can tell immediately the guy that is in love with the idea of being a best-selling author versus the guy that just loves to write and would love to be able to, do something that they love for a living. That second guy is going to be successful. But in terms of the nitty gritty of how it works, it's a little different for everybody. We took a shotgun approach, which is we just created an enormous amount of intellectual property in the hope that, if we come up with 4 different series, maybe one of them will stick and we can make a living at it. Yeah. We were very blessed that everything we came up with sold. And so now we're in the enviable and difficult position of having to create a book about every 12 to 14 weeks to keep up with our contracts.
Wow.
But I think the most important, and I'd love to hear what Brian would say on this too, but I think the most important advice is that it's, if you love it, then do it and try to figure out your path to make it part of your living or all of your living if possible. But it better start with that, or you're just simply not going to make it.
Yeah, the first question, I love what Jeff said. The first question we always ask aspiring writers, why are you doing this? Are you doing this for yourself? Are you doing this to make money, to make a living? Do you want as many people as possible to hear your message, or do you want to be, an author that's on interviews? You really need to be honest with yourself. Like, why are you doing this? Because now more than ever, the trajectory to get to whatever your end goal is, there's a lot of different ways to get there. It used to just be that if you wanted to be an author that had published work, you had to get a literary agent, and then they would find a publisher, and that was it. That's how you did it. But now, we have very fragmented readership with lots of different channels. You have the Amazon Kindle Direct Press, KDP publishing platform, which is wonderful. Anyone can become an author, but also anyone can become an author. So let me put it in this perspective. You know, it used to be, you know, let's use university metaphor. If you want to get into Harvard, you know, and everyone knows that only the top 1% of applicants are going to get accepted. So, you know, everybody might want to go to Harvard, but not everybody can go to Harvard. And the publishing industry was sort of like that, you know, very difficult to get a literary agent because they're vetting out the thousands, hundreds of thousands of submissions a year they get of people that just can't write. And then they go to the publishers, and that's another layer of vetting. So really, if you saw a published book in Barnes and Noble, that book is like cream of the crop. That's like a 1%er that got out into the market. But now with KDP, there's over 2 million titles published a year. And some of them are not very good because the people don't know how to write. They don't know the art of it. It's not been edited. It's not been vetted. And so now anyone can be an author, but that doesn't mean that the public is going to find your book and embrace it and you're going to sell 1 million copies. In fact, quite the contrary, you know, much more difficult to get noticed these days.
I want to add one other thing about, you know, how to make a living now, because it's different. If you were going to be like what we all grew up with, right? Reading Tom Clancy or Ludlum or whoever was the big one, you bought their hardcover book, and those people made a living that way because that's how we consumed stories back in the day. But now we have this multi-generational approach to storytelling and to story consumption. There are entire demographics who will never read a book this year, but they'll listen to an audiobook. Others that will never listen to an audiobook, but they really like, you know, streaming television or whatever. And so part of our strategy from the very beginning was to diversify across all those channels. So we are always, all of our books make the bestseller list in audio, for example. All of our books do well in Kindle. All of our books do well in paper. But now we've diversified into other forms of media. So we've got a bunch of TV things that we're doing and a couple of feature films that we're doing, not because we wanted to be that guy, but simply because if you really want people to consume your stories, if they're not in multiple channels, you're not reaching everybody that you want to reach. Part of it is a love of storytelling, and part of it's financial. Like I want them to buy my story too, right? So that's been a part of it also, is being very smart and proactive and forward thinking about how to diversify our stories across platforms.
Love that. And all right, so transition here. So tier 1 is the main series, or the first series you guys people can check out. You got a new book coming out, The Sandbox, right? Is that the correct name? So Brian, give us a bit of an idea on what that's about and when we can get that.
So Sandbox is the first in a new sort of run of techno thrillers. You know, with our backgrounds, we have a lot of different interests. So this book is focused on artificial intelligence. It's very much in the news with Chat GPT's come out. You know, I think unless you've been living under a rock, you've heard of it. And, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty now, you know, because suddenly artificial intelligence, these large language models are doing things that, you know, people didn't think were possible. These were things communicating, analyzing information, and providing, you know, cogent thoughts was something that only human beings could do. And now we have artificial intelligence doing this. And so, again, the Sandbox is sort of us. It's actually, we wrote it 2 years ago, so we were a little ahead. We were trying to think ahead, and we said, what if, you know, one of these large language models, one of these AIs became sentient, you know, and we know that, you know, artificial intelligence is operating at a frame rate that's much higher than the human mind. So, you know, our perception of time is the same across all human beings. It's based on the speed that our brain works and the fact that we live in a 24-hour day. But for a machine intelligence that's operating at a completely different frame rate, time would feel very different. And so, you know, we talked about PTS. We talked about what happens to people who are put in solitary confinement. And the idea of a sandbox is it's a testing environment for an AI so that it can't get out and do harm to, you know, the company's other systems or out into the internet. The sandbox is basically like solitary confinement for an AI. And so the sort of cool thing about this idea, or the what if question, is, you know, what if this AI being in a sandbox for 8 hours every night when the programmers went home, that's like being in solitary confinement over and over and ritually, like every night, it's like being in solitary confinement for 9 months. What would that do to an intelligence? And in our story, it did bad things. So, that's the crux of this idea is, how does a sentient machine intelligence deal with stress and loneliness and isolation, and what sort of psychopathies might develop?
And then to take that to the thriller big picture level, think Hannibal Lecter meets Her, right? So what if a sentient AI went insane and was able to murder its creator? But it's a program, it's not a robot, right? So how would that work? So we have this really fun character, Valerie Marks. She's a former CID investigator in the Army with her own baggage and PTS that she carries with her. And she's now a homicide detective whose very first case is the most famous man in the world who has pioneered AI. And everything in her instinct tells her that the killer is the AI, and no one believes her. And so then she has to go down this bunny hole. So it was really, really, really fun to write, a little bit different for us, but a lot of those same elements that we love to do. So really fun book.
I love it. And when will this be available?
That book comes out in July. We have a book come out about every 3 or 4 months these days. So that one comes out in July. The next Sons of Valor in the fall. But the easiest thing is just go to andrews-wilson.com, and all the release dates are out there. But Sandbox will be everywhere starting July something. I can't tell you the day. It's in July.
Perfect. Well, that's awesome. Well, guys, it's been a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. Appreciate having you guys on, and come back anytime, and let's hang out and talk some more.
Hey, we really enjoyed it, man. Appreciate you having us.
Yeah,
My pleasure.
You have no choice. We're coming back.
Sounds great. All right, guys, we'll see you next time on